Hi guys, Scott with the Tech Report here in Damage Labs. Today we're going to build a new PC and then we're going to give it away. The concept for this build is something that you may remember from last spring when I built myself a new system that I called the Damagebox 2015. That system was based on Haswell processors and all the latest stuff, and it was kind of a not completely high-end but awfully nice, little better than mid-range type of system that's good for general use and also great for gaming. And we have the opportunity now, as you may know, the PC hardware world has been through an upgrade cycle. Intel has released its Skylake processors, the Z170 chipset is out, and motherboard makers have updated their stuff as well. And so there are new parts available to build something nicer, not just in that domain, but in other places too. And that's what we're going to do today, is we're going to build an updated Damagebox. And since I already have a great system that doesn't need to be replaced, we're going to give that away to some lucky reader or viewer. So listen up, and we'll tell you at the end of this thing how you might be able to win it. This build is sponsored by the folks at Asus, Cooler Master, and Kingston. And what I've done is kind of like last time, I went through their product catalogs and I just shopped their websites basically to see what things I wanted to include in a build that would be nicely balanced and look good and function well. So I've done that. And what I'm going to do is I'll take you through the parts that I've chosen, briefly explain why I've chosen them, then I'll put the PC together and we'll show you how that looks. Alright, so the first component that we're going to talk about is a motherboard. This is a Asus Maximus 8 Hero. It's actually part of their Republic of Gamers line of high-end boards. It's kind of actually heavy to lift. Republic of Gamers boards are more expensive and just jam-packed with the features. And, you know, this is kind of the deal with these. I don't necessarily recommend spending the extra money to buy the most expensive motherboard, but the features here are nice, and a lot of the things that are goodness waterfall down the rest of the Asus product line to more affordable boards. So things especially like the firmware, the great fan speed controls, all of the things that you want in a motherboard. Asus has a lineup of boards. So this one is the top of the line. It's a little more expensive. It may not be the best value, but it's really nice. And since we're giving this system away, it makes a lot of sense to put in the nicest possible option. So the Maximus 8 Hero is a full ATX board, as you can see. It's based on the Z170 chipset, and it has the socket here for a Skylake processor, which we have one installed. And then it has 4 DIMM slots. We've got those filled. And it's got 3 PCI Express by 16 slots. Most notably, these 2 come from the CPU or dual by 8 when you use both of them. And there are a number of, on these fancy motherboards, there are a number of high-end features. This one has basically all of them. So Asus has included a Intel gigabit LAN Ethernet connection, and a lot of their competitors use killer NICs, which have packet prioritization for gaming, which is of maybe if your bottleneck is usually out on the internet, but is nice if you're going to run something locally on your PC that might get in the way of your game, like a file transfer or something like that while you're playing. So to compete with that, Asus has its own technology, a software technology for packet prioritization that they built into the Republic of Gamers boards like this one. So it's an Intel NIC. Intel NICs are solid, generally quite good, and then it's got packet prioritization via Asus software. The other thing that might be of note here is the Supreme FX audio. We have talked about these. You've seen things like this before. This has an ESS DAC, a digital to analog converter. It has high quality Nichicon capacitors and kind of a short route like a lot of these boards now have between the electronics here for the audio and then the outputs right over here. And they've covered it with a little shroud. The shroud is just for cosmetics. They've got several of them on the board here. But the idea is that this whole analog output stage is supposed to be higher quality than what you'd get on a normal motherboard, and approaching the quality level that you get for a sound card. And then this comes with software that provides all kinds of features and control over that. So that's kind of nice. Another thing that you get with these Asus boards that not everybody has, let me flip it around so you can see, is the DIMM slots have only a tab on one side, and so you don't have to have tabs on both sides pulled out in order to install and remove DIMMs, which is kind of nifty. They've had this for a number of years, and I like it. I've gotten used to it. I think it's easier to work with, and it means that those DIMM tabs don't get in the way of your graphics card, which they can sometimes be obstructed by in some systems. Another thing that is of note with this motherboard, and this is just an example, there are tons of extras that you get with the Asus board, but this is one of my favorites. This is something called the Q connector. So the deal with this is when you're installing the motherboard in your case, there are things that you need to connect, like the power LED light, power switch, reset switch, things like that. And it's always a pain in the rear to connect them. But this little connector has all of the pins that you need. It has them all labeled. You can hold this in your hand and gently attach everything that you need to attach. And then it pops on to the motherboard in one stroke like that. And so you then have everything installed. And if you need to work on the board, you can pop it off and easily do what you need to do. I wish every motherboard came with this, but it's one of the nice perks that you get with this Maximus 8 Hero. So other than the obvious extra goodies, you do get the Z170 chipset, so this has tons of bandwidth. That's kind of what Z170 is about. There are, I believe, 8 SATA ports on this thing, and 4 of which are in these additional, like, SATA Express, nobody uses them, connectors. There's an M.2 slot that actually has 4 PCI Express lanes coming to it, so you can have a very fast PCI Express SSD there. I like the mounting location for this one. I think it's not going to be right underneath a graphics card, generally speaking, and so the thermal situation should be reasonably good. That's nice. And that's kind of what Z170 is about, is just tons of bandwidth. There's also lots of USB bandwidth. This board has, as you can see, multiple USB ports in the back. It has headers for more, and it comes with, you know, everything that you want on that front. Also, there are physical buttons on this board that not everybody has. There's a BIOS reset switch, so you can reset the CMOS settings for your BIOS. If you've been overclocking or something happens, it's not stable, it won't boot. You can just hit the button there. You don't have to take the case, the cover off the case and reach in and set a jumper. Also, there's a start button here, a reset button, and then an internal clear CMOS button that you can press as well. So for testing on an open test bench like I do, this is nice. Or if you haven't got everything connected in your case, you're doing initial troubleshooting, the power buttons are nice, and they just look nifty. If they're in a case with a window, you can see them there. The little start button is kind of neat. So that's the Maximus 8 Hero. It's a great board to anchor this build, and looks nice. And I think we'll find that everything that we've got to go with it matches the color scheme, which is a bonus. And it's not that hard to match black and red, but there's actually not a lot of red on this, and there's a ton of black and everything else. So it should look good. Here's the other black component we have. We have Kingston HyperX Savage DDR4 DIMMs. These are 4 4-gig modules for a total of 16 gigs. I think ideally we'd have 2 8-gig modules to start and some expansion capability, but what we got from Kingston is 4x4 gig, which is still 16 gigs is great. It's a good way to go. So I think whoever gets this system will appreciate it. These are rated for 3,000 gigatransfers per second, or megatransfers per second, or megahertz as everybody says, at 1.35 volts. So that's sort of standard DDR4 voltage. It doesn't need anything special to get up beyond what the Skylake processors officially support, which is 2133. But with the Unlock K series chips, we can take that clock speed right up. Which brings me to the CPU, which is the last part of this picture. Now, this is a Core i7 6700K. It's the fastest quad-core Skylake, and it's unlocked upper multiplier, so you can overclock it. 4 cores, 8 threads. You know the deal probably with Skylake. You probably read our review. Skylake has basically a 5 to 15, maybe 20% increase in performance over the the Core i7 4790K from last year. It basically achieves that by having higher per clock instruction throughput, and then there's some extra goodies, things like speed shift, where it can be autonomous and, with Windows 10, and control its own clock speeds and transitional loads very quickly, and by doing so kind of recovers some power that it saves and turn that power into performance. So there's some nice things going on with Skylake, and that's kind of one of the reasons we're doing this build. And we just went out and got the fastest Skylake processor to go in this thing. So those are the core components, and I think they should make for a nice system. Up next is the storage subsystem, and what we have there, well, the heart of it here is these two Kingston HyperX SSDs. These are 240 gig SATA drives. And what we're going to do is we're going to boot off one, and we're going to have one that's just a spare that we can put games on, because games load a lot faster off SSDs, and you can sometimes overcome problems like, I think the Arkham Knight game that has had so much trouble. One of the problems is streaming stuff, the assets in from disk as you play. Put that on an SSD, it really runs a lot better. So these are HyperX Savage. They're based on a Phison controller. We found that controller to kind of be mid-range among SATA drives, but as you may know, that means you're good to go, because SATA drives have already saturated the limits of the 6 gigabit per second SATA interface generally, and they're just already 2 orders of magnitude faster than a hard drive on access times. And the controllers are in a good place. We haven't had any real issues or complaints with the Phison controllers. So credit Kingston also. This may be the best looking SSD that I've seen. It's just, your standard little brick thing, but they put a nice bit of bling on the outside of that. So we got those, and we should be good to go there. Now we could have gotten a PCI Express SSD based on use the newer NVMe protocol, plugged it into the M.2 slot on the Z170 board, and done something really fancy. One of the reasons that doesn't make a lot of sense yet is there aren't very many options, and the options that are out there are pretty expensive for the amount of storage you get. So I think these are each like $95, and you get a lot of storage for the money. And the other reason, and this is something that I hope gets fixed over time, but we have not been able to, in a desktop workload, measure a meaningful performance difference between the fastest NVMe PCI Express SSDs and SATA drives. Now you can do it in a synthetic benchmark. You can see faster transfer rates. The few SATA PCI Express the few PCI Express NVMe drives out there actually do have higher throughput rates and better performance, but finding a place where it matters in a desktop PC is the harder thing. And it's possible that PC operating systems and applications will have to change to take advantage of the bandwidth of those things. So for today, for this build, these will more than suffice. And going forward, we do have that slot available for an upgrade on the motherboard, the M.2 slot, if NVMe drives become a way to go. We're going to back those drives with these amazing Western Digital. We asked them to send some drives for this thing, and I requested 4 terabyte, and again they sent 6 terabytes. So I've got dual 6 terabytes, and what I'm going to do with these is what I usually do, which is put them into a RAID 1, so that one drive mirrors the other, and if you lose a drive, because mechanical hard drives do fail, then you don't lose your data. Now it's not a replacement for a backup, but I do like the integrity that you get out of a RAID 1 configuration. Now, if you win this PC and you want to do something else with it, you could take 2 of them and put them into a RAID 0 and double your transfer rates, or you could use them as 2 separate drives and have a total of 12 terabytes of storage. So that's pretty darn nice for the storage subsystem. And it's kind of one of these examples of why, although we kind of go for an upper middle class build, we wind up with premium components when we get sponsors involved, because they want to show off the latest stuff, and we're not about to object. So there's that. Although I'll tell you, if you're buying it for yourself, I think 4 terabyte is still where the sweet spot is in terms of price. One other thing in the storage subsystem we didn't have in the last Damagebox is this Blu-ray disc reader. And it's a DVD writer, Blu-ray disc reader from Asus. They make these. They decided to send this along to put in. I cannot object, because this lets you play Blu-ray movies, burn DVDs, burn discs for if you got an old car with a car DVD player like I do, or CD player like I do, then you may want this still. So, there's a slot available in the case. Why not? Anyway, that's our storage subsystem, and it should be a really nice one. Okay, hey, I almost forgot the graphics cards. So you guys may remember last time in the Damagebox, I did dual GeForce GTX 970s, and maybe a little controversial simply because we tend to recommend the fastest single graphics card that you can get. But at the time we did that build, the higher end GPUs like the Radeon Fury and the GTX 980 Ti had not yet been released. Now that they're out, I think probably for most builds like this, I would look at a Fury or a 980 Ti as the sort of high-end GPU. Actually be Fury X, a high-end GPU that you might want to look at, especially if you're going to be gaming in 4K or something like that. However, what Asus has provided us in a bit of, I think, one-upsmanship from the dual 970s in the last one, is dual GeForce GTX 980s. So these are 4 gig cards. They're Asus Strix cards, which we've tested a number of these in the past year or two, and they've just been all excellent. Asus has done a great job with its coolers and the physicals of these things. They're always quiet. They have nice fan tuning, and all of that. And you can see on these things, there's back plates to protect them. They're very heavy. There's a lot of copper inside for cooling. They're relatively large and tall. They take up a fair amount of space. If you have room in your cooler or in your case for this cooler, that's great. They are a little bit long and a little bit tall compared to your average graphics card. And the theory there is basically that you use that extra space and fill it with more copper, more fins, more cooling. And so they tend to run very quiet. And as is the usual with Strix cards, these are higher than stock clock 980s. So they should be, depending on the application and all, 5 to 10%, maybe more faster than a reference design. This thing has HDMI port and then triple display ports and then a single DVI. And then obviously we've got another one of them, so we could drive a lot of monitors with this configuration. These things will slot into those 2 PCI Express by 16 slots coming off the CPU. They'll get 8 3.0 lanes each. We'll use the SLI connector to connect them together. They require an 8-pin plus a 6-pin power input each. We'll have no trouble supplying that with our power supply. And it should be a nice setup. And, if SLI sometimes does cause issues, sometimes drivers aren't out yet or the games aren't updated. If there's a problem, what I found is you just turn off SLI. And for the most part, especially if you don't have a 4K display, a single 970 or 980, especially a 980, will suffice for almost any game. So 2 of them, a second one is bonus, and it can be a nice bonus in a lot of cases. Anyway, that's the deal with this. It is an improvement over the last Damagebox and a very nice graphics subsystem. Next up, we have our power supply and our cooling. And this is a little bit of a different thing. This cooler, take a look at it. This is a Gemini S524 V2 cooler from Cooler Master. V2 it's a new version. I think it came out pretty recently that has been updated based on customer feedback. And this thing is kind of a beast. It's very unconventional. It has 5 copper heat pipes going right over the CPU, and you can see that's going to be the center mount point, and then the cooling with the heat pipes and the fins comes out from that. And so you could put this over above like the DIMMs, or spin it around and put it right above like the VRMs on your motherboard. And then what you get is you have the air from the fan blowing down onto the motherboard's power delivery circuitry and or DIMMs, which is quite a change from what we did with the last Damagebox, where we used a closed loop liquid cooler. I like closed loop coolers. I like that they take air, hot air, and put it right out of the back of the case and expel it. But I also have had, not in the Damagebox build that we did, but in other builds in the past, I've had issues with liquid cooling taking the heat off the CPU but not providing any additional airflow around the socket, and that's kind of expected in some cases. So having this is kind of the polar opposite thing. There's going to be a lot of airflow around the motherboard thanks to this cooler. Now, this thing has a 120 millimeter fan. I don't know if you can see, but you can actually upgrade it to 140 mil, which could make it a little bit quieter. I think there's room for air to flow from a 140 mil fan. I don't think that's going to be necessary for what we're doing with the Skylake processor that has relatively low power consumption. This should be plenty. Anyway, but this is something a little bit different, and I wanted to give it a shot. This could be used not just in the case like we have, but in a more compact build because it's not super tall like a lot of tower coolers, thanks to the right angle that you get out of those heat pipes. So that's interesting. And then, for the sake of total overkill, we have a V1200 Platinum power supply from Cooler Master. You know, and I basically would have been happy going with their V750, which was what we used last time. But you know how it is; these guys want to showcase their latest stuff, and I'm not going to complain about this beast. This thing is completely modular. Nothing is plugged in by default, and it has a nice big fan here. And this fan has a hybrid mode where if the power supply is less than, I believe it's 25% loaded, then the fan doesn't spin. You can turn that on and off. It's got a little control that goes into an expansion slot that switches between auto and hybrid. I like the idea of the hybrid mode. I like power supplies. I've had several that do not spin unless they're loaded up. Generally has been a good thing, and it makes for a nice quiet PC. And you can imagine with the capacity of this thing, it's going to spend most of its time, even if you're busy, not spinning the fan. So it should be a really quiet build. This is 80 plus platinum certified. Obviously it's a platinum name, and so it should be more efficient than your average power supply. And this thing can support 100 amps on the single 12 volt rail, which is an insane amount of power. And it has the ability to support 12 6+2 PCI Express auxiliary connections. So that's enough for a ridiculous amount of multi-GPU stuff going on. We're not going to get anywhere close to that with this build. There are 2 bags that come with this thing full of cables. Let me open these. It's a little noisy. But these things are, you can see, ribbon style flat for nice routing. So we've got everything that we need. In fact, I think we'll just need a small fraction of what comes with this for the build. Anyway, once that's nestled in there, even though it's a little bigger than your average PSU, there should be room for it in the master case, and it should just be all bonus from there. All right, up next, let's talk about the peripherals in this thing. And this is one of my favorite things about this build. So, Cooler Master is one of the sponsors, and so we get to have really good peripherals. And you may know they have a great series of keyboards. This is the Rapid Fire XTI, and these things, the Rapid Fire lineup, they're some of my favorite keyboards. They have Cherry MX switches. They have very basic layouts. They don't mess around. They don't have a lot of extra buttons, which personally I don't like. I don't like to have. They have a good shape. They're good looking. It's nice materials. Anyway, it's just a classic, very good keyboard. This particular one, though, is full of bling. Let me show you what I mean by going ahead and hitting the button here. And we can turn on one of several. Let's see if I can get the best one here. Here we go. Several different modes. This is kind of the oscillating wave of color. Underneath the keycaps here are red and blue LEDs, and then there's a microcontroller built into this thing, and so there's an entire sort of light show that this thing is capable of doing. And it's, as you can see, it actually is backlit. It shows through the keycaps as well, so you get the illumination in the dark, and then there are all kinds of effects that you can choose from. So I'm going to try and set several of them and show them to you. One of them is just a very quick, maybe you can see this, a quick fade from pressing a keycap. And then another one is this funky effect where you press a keycap and the wave goes out from that. Another one is this sort of rows and columns thing. You press a key and the row and column lights up. What's this one? Oh, this is just lit. And you can change the color of the illumination if you want to match You can make it more red or more blue according to whatever your system is. I think you can go all blue, but I'm not super proficient in this yet. Let's see if we can do that. I can't figure it out. Anyway, it's a lot of fun. There are tons of different modes, and you know, it's just a little bit of extra bling. The thing is, there's a great keyboard underneath it, and the thing about this particular one, this Rapid Fire XTI, it ships with, or it comes with, and I don't know if you can buy these. They're hard to find usually. Sometimes you can find them at Cooler Master's online store, but it has Cherry MX Green switches, which is something they've done for me personally because I love them. They're higher effort clicky switches from Cherry. They originally were used for spacebar switches. I think most of the Cherry switches, actually there's not enough positive feedback and not enough effort to type, and this is the highest effort typing Cherry MX switch type. It's very springy, and I just love it. So whoever gets this system, you're going to have this sort of unicorn of distinctive keycaps combined with the Quickfire XTI Light Show. So that will be a lot of fun. And to match it, there's a Cooler Master Zornet 2 mouse. And this thing is, as you can see, the mouse wheel lights up. And it is also a light show. It can go from blue to green to red and back. So you can select your color and match it with the keyboard and match it with the illumination in the rest of the system as you see fit. Otherwise, this is a really nice little gaming mouse, 2000 DPI sensor, lightweight. It's for what they call claw grip. People who have a claw grip. It's got forward and back buttons on the side, and otherwise is very simple. And it fits my hand well. I like it. I know mice are a very personal thing, but I think this is a nice one. I think it's something that kind of fits my preference. I like that it has this extra ring finger rest on it, and the good materials, good grippy rubber on the sides that's textured. So the Zornet 2 is a nice companion for the Quickfire XTI keyboard. Last thing on just straight up peripherals is from Kingston. This is a HyperX Cloud 2 gaming headset, and this thing is super lightweight, really adjustable, and I have to say, and I'll put this on, this is awesome here, but I have to say this is the single most comfortable gaming headset that I have tried. It is super lightweight. It doesn't pinch your head a lot, but it's enough to stay on, and it's just easy, high quality stuff. Nice foamy microphone that comes out, I think. I'm not going to try and take it out now, but it's a good headset, and it comes with this USB sound card thing, so you can plug it into that if you want, and this offers USB audio with control for headset volume, mic volume, and 7.1 channel virtual surround. Obviously now you can get 7.1 channels out of the two speakers inside the headphone cups. I think there are only two, one in each cup, but it will virtualize to give you a feel of surround sound. So that's kind of nifty. Also, there are additional cups that are covered with this kind of velvet. If you don't like the sort of leathery, and it is really soft leather or leatherette, whatever it is. So I like that, but if you want, you can switch to these other cups as well. So that's the headset, and honestly, I'm a little jealous. I think it's a really nice headset to have. So good luck to whoever gets that. Anyway, that's it for the basic peripherals, and like I said, they're really nice. Okay, next up is our case, and this is Cooler Master's Master Case 5. This is a new product from Cooler Master. It's kind of an upgrade from what we had last time with the Silencio, just because it's new and it offers some more options. The idea behind this thing, and as you can see, it's a pretty much a standard size, like mid-size, mid-tower ATX case. But the idea behind this thing is that it's upgradable and modular, and so the Master Case starts with a base configuration, and then you can add things to it. And so Cooler Master has sent for this build almost all of the extras that you can add, including, and this is already installed up here, and it kind of changes the look of the case with this panel that goes across here. There's a radiator mount for water coolers. We're actually not really going to need that, I don't think, with this build, but I've gone ahead and installed it, so it's there for future expansion. The original master case doesn't have that. It doesn't have this piece across here, so it comes down. It looks a little bit different cosmetically. Both look fine. I like this better. They sent the parts, so I've already installed it. Other pieces include, you can see right here, there are a couple of these 3.5-inch hard drive sleds together in a single piece, and they've sent a couple of add-ons. There's a 2-drive sled or a 3-drive one, and they all then, it's not really a sled, it's a cage, and each of the cages has sleds in it for 3.5-inch drives. So you can expand the amount of storage, and it's really kind of an either or. We can put in the triple to go with the double to have room for 5 drives, or we can put in a second double one and have room for 4 3.5-inch drives in the cages. And that's kind of the peak of that. Now there is room for, there are a couple of sleds for 2.5-inch drives here. There are a couple of 5.25-inch bays, and around back there are places for two more 2.5-inch SSD sleds, and the SSDs just go on top of these and screw in. You'll see when I've got it installed with the HyperX drives. But there's room for 2 more around back, and so we've got a third one here that we're going to install. Also, we will install, there's a windowed side panel for the case. The master case comes with the standard sort of non-windowed panel, and you can order the windowed side panel. So this is kind of an a la carte way of getting to what would be a higher end case, but it starts with a lower price base with the master case. And generally speaking, it's just a nice case that should be very quiet. I'm anticipating good things on that front. We'll try to make this build as quiet as we can. All right, here's the finished product. The build is essentially complete here, and I've already actually installed Windows and done thermal testing, and the thing is pretty much ready to go. So I'm going to show you how it looks inside. First of all, I've got the obviously the windowed side panel on the case. This case comes, the Master Case 5 comes without the Windows side panel, and that's one of the extras that you can get, like I said earlier. So I've got that on, and it's a big window. It actually blacks out the bottom part where there's some wiring that's kind of messy from the power supply, and then there's a very big open area for everything else. So I don't know that you can see it on camera, but it's easy to see through here and see the guts of the build. So let's go ahead and take this off, though, so that it is readily visible and you can see the inside of the case. So this is the completed setup, and it's very neat. I really only had one big snag when I was putting this thing together. It wasn't a big snag, and that was the front fan, which is right up here, 140 millimeter fan, didn't reach to a header on the motherboard for for power and speed control. And Cooler Master includes in the case some Molex to fan connector adapters that you could use if you wanted that fan to just be powered off the power supply. But I wanted fan control from the motherboard, so I needed a little more reach. I didn't see any extenders of that type included, and so what I did, and this is just sort of, the type of thing you do when you're building, is just improvise a solution. I rotated this fan 90 degrees, and by doing so, it changed where the cable came off relative to the motherboard, and then there was plenty of reach to plug right up in here, so that I have fan speed control for the front fan, the back fan, and then we've got the CPU cooler fan on the Gemini. The Gemini is interesting because it's got this right turn thing, and it's flat, and it's really meant, there's a lot of space here, it's really meant for cases where there's less room than there is in this one. And I would say that the Gemini is a little bit difficult to mount. The mounting mechanism on the back is a little bit fussy, and that's kind of a consequence of the fact that you don't have direct access because of the right turn fan to just screw something in from the top. And so my experience was that when I was using the Neptune 120 cooler in my last build, that was easier to use than this one. I would say that this cooler in particular is nice for builds where you simply don't have the vertical space or anything else, and in that case then you're going to be willing to sort of mess with the mounting mechanism on the back. Also, it's only a $42 cooler, so it's a great deal, and it's very effective and quiet. Actually, that has been a good experience all around, with just the exception of the mounting. So I don't have a lot of complaints about anything else. Generally speaking, the compatibility on these things with new parts, like I said last time, is just excellent. I didn't have to worry very much about, will this plug into that? Will I have reach? Everything reached. The power supply cables were stellar. There's no reach issues there. And, you know, I did take my time and do the routing so that things were fairly direct. But if you do that, I really don't anticipate very many issues in the build. You do have to just kind of stop and pause and think and train yourself. That's something you do as you learn to build a PC. All right, here's a look at the insides, the guts of the thing from the front. And you can see it looks pretty neat. It's kind of got a Cash meets Vader black on black theme with just a tiny bit of red on the motherboard. And I really like the look of it overall. It's very clean because, again, the cable routing is nice. Like most modern cases, you know, you've got grommets surrounding the motherboard, and so there's room to tuck things in. So I didn't have to string things across in order to have all the proper connections. So it looks really nice and orderly and neat, and frankly, I'm not super awesome at cable routing and things like that, as you'll see when you look at the back of it, but these cases make it easy. So I have right here the two 6 terabyte drives mounted together in a single cage, and then I decided to leave out the extra cages that are an option on this case because there's not, as you can see, there's not a ton of clearance back here. Now, I could, I'm sure, put another 3 drive or 2 drive cage in here if need be for expandability. In fact, whoever wins this, I'll send them the additional cages. But I like having this clearance because it allows better airflow for these 2 Strix graphics cards. And so I just went ahead and left that open for now. And again, we have 2 6 terabyte drives and then some SSDs. And you may notice there aren't any SSDs in the picture here. I was hoping to mount them up front, kind of right below the lower graphics card, but it turns out that that's really tight, and it may restrict a little bit of airflow to the fans for the graphics card, and there's some issues with running the cables along there. So what I decided to do was actually mount them in another place, and I'll show you where they are around back on the drive sleds. But that's where we are with that. Anyhow, otherwise, I think it all came out well. I've got these little tails sticking up from the dual power connectors for the graphics cards. That's sort of an inevitable consequence of the way this looks. And other than that, there isn't a lot of setup that isn't neat. Generally, it all is nice and neat and orderly. So I think it looks pretty good, and I'll show you around back where honestly it doesn't look as good, but that's why we kind of hide things back there. Alright, here's the back side of the build, and you can see it's quite a bit messier here, but we put that side panel on and nobody has to know. So that's a good thing there. Obviously right here we have the SSDs mounted on the 2.5-inch drive sleds, and so that looks nice actually. It's kind of sad that that's going to be hidden back there, but that was easily the best option in terms of just space and how things fit, and it is a nice neat fit right back there, and they are easily accessible when you pop off the side panel. You also have access to the backs of the hard drives where the power and SATA connectors go in, and then you can see right down here there's this kind of channel running down this depression on the side of the motherboard, and there's Velcro tabs here or loops here where you can put the cabling, and I actually took one or two of these out and put some additional cabling beneath that so that it runs in a channel here. I didn't put everything, the super thick stuff, in there because it wouldn't quite all fit, and I did leave some things just kind of loose instead of bundling them like this cable for, I think that's for the Blu-ray drive. But you know, you don't have to. You have the option of being a little messy back here, and that's kind of what I've done. So that looks nice overall. I think you can see here's the mounting retention mechanism for the Gemini, and you screw these 4 nuts here around these threaded bolts in order to mount it. So that's fine. And the modular cables, only the ones I needed, are plugged into the power supply. It isn't a lot of cables actually, because it can feed quite a few things. Like I was able to put both hard drives and the Blu-ray disc on a single power lead, and assuming that the Blu-ray drive doesn't like draw too much power because it's got issues, then that should be perfectly fine. And that's kind of the way it goes. You can have 2 of the power connectors to a graphics card off one cable. I showed you the little loops on the other side. So really, you don't have a ton of cabling that you have to bring off of this in order to power this complement of hardware. So that's the Skylake Damagebox. I think it's a pretty good build overall. Like I said, I've already installed Windows. I've done a bunch of thermal and load stress testing. I use the ASUS software that will profile each of your fans. It figures out what the range of speeds is for each one. You can tell it, this is the rear fan, this is the front fan, this is the CPU fan. And you can even tell it, okay, this one needs to key off the CPU temperature, while this one will key off the motherboard temperature for its loading fan speed policy. So I played around with that a little bit and got this thing tuned up to where it's pretty quiet. And my experience is, compared to the last one, which was in the Cooler Master Silencio, this is actually quieter under load in the Master Case 5, which I think has to do with the dual 140mm fans and the overall configuration of this thing, in conjunction with the ASUS fan speed control, which is just excellent and doesn't really run the fans any faster than they need to be to keep the system cool. So that's really nice. And just to review real quick, so what we have is a Core i7-6700K with the Cooler Master Gemini cooler, dual GeForce GTX 984 gig graphics cards, the Maximus 8 Hero Z170 motherboard, dual Western Digital black 6 terabyte hard drives and a RAID 1 mirror, 2 Kingston 240 gig SSDs, HyperX variety, around back, and the Master Case 5 obviously, and the V1200 Platinum from Cooler Master as the power supply. Nice system. If you'd like to win it, then we're going to have all the details of that at the Tech Report at techreport.com. I'll have the link in the video notes so you can click on that as well. We'll tell you what you need to do to have a chance to win this thing. Thanks for watching.